Please welcome Eliezer to the stage.
Boy, you write one story about baby-eating aliens. At the Second International Congress on Forecasting in 1982, some experimenters asked two different groups of professional analysts about, well, Group 1 was asked about the probability of a suspension of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Soviet Union, and Group 2 was asked about the probability of a Russian invasion of Poland and a complete suspension of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Soviet Union. Just by looking over here, you can probably guess that Group 2 responded with significantly higher probabilities. If you don't see what's wrong with this, let me present an even clearer version. Let's say you've got a die with 4 green faces and 2 red faces. You're going to roll the die 20 times and record the series of green and red faces, and if your chosen sequence comes up, you're going to win $25. Now, would you prefer to bet on RGRRR, GRGRRR, or GRRRRR? 65% chose sequence 2, which looks like a likely candidate because it's got the most green in it and therefore most closely resembles the die. And this game was played with real payoffs. Now the problem is that sequence 1 dominates sequence 2 because it appears within sequence 2, so anytime sequence 2 pays out, sequence 1 automatically pays out. And this is the conjunction fallacy. It's called the conjunction fallacy because you're assigning a lower probability to a single event than a compound event. And the moral is that adding detail to a story can make the story sound more plausible, even though the story necessarily becomes less probable. This is illustrative of the methodology of the emerging field of heuristics and biases. We have an experimentally demonstrable form of human stupidity. We know it's stupidity because it violates the laws of probability theory. This is not allowed to happen ever. And the errors that we make are often more revealing about how the brain works than the successes of the human brain, the few successes of the human brain, I should say. And I go around, artificial intelligence, real AI theory is actually very difficult to explain, so I decided I needed something comprehensible that I could explain. And human rationality is sort of AI light, because instead of having to program the whole thing from scratch, you're just going to take an existing system and talk about how to pull some levers on it and maybe make it work a little better. This particular principle of the burdensome details marks, in my opinion, a sort of dividing line between the sort of careful futurism and storytelling. You've got careful futurists who carefully weigh every single detail that they dare to add to their stories. And you've got people who are just making stuff up that sounds cool. And well, this and that, and oh yes, and this will happen because China develops the technology in the year 2020 on April 20th between 4 and 4:30 in the morning. So this principle of weighing every detail, and even just the notion of you can't just make stuff up, demarcates the difference between a lot of careful and uncareful thinking, and especially true in futurism. A further case of the same basic theme. They asked some MBA students going to Thailand on a school trip how much they would pay for terrorism insurance. Group 1, flight from Thailand to the US. Group 2, round-trip flight. Group 3, whole trip. They would pay around $17 for insurance covering just the flight from Thailand to the US. The group asked about the round-trip flight would pay $14, and the group asked about the whole trip would pay $7.50. This would be a fun thing to know if you're selling insurance or buying it. And what this has to do with mostly is that flight from Thailand to the US, it sounds very vivid. So it generates a lot of worry, and people are willing to pay more. Bruce Schneier pointed out, and he pointed out before Hurricane Katrina, that the Bush administration was defending against movie plot scenarios of terrorism. And to do that, they were taking resources away from the emergency response capabilities that could respond to any terrorist act or even any emergency. So vagueness is a great thing when it comes to, as it were, precautions or remedies. A vague remedy, one that is a general remedy, one that's good for a lot of different problems. Now, that may not sound exciting, but if you're not willing to pay more for it, you've got a problem. Scope neglect. They asked some Canadian households how much they would pay to save Group 1, 2,000 birds, Group 2, 20,000 birds, Group 3, 200,000 birds from drowning in uncovered oil ponds. Would you care to guess what the results were? Group 1 would pay $80, Group 2 would pay $78, and Group 3 would pay $88 to save 200,000 birds. Now, I just want to take a moment to dwell on the notion of a investment in something that was actually going to pay you money, and the notion of being able to point to something in the market where the payoff differed by a factor of 100, and you were willing to pay $80 for one and $88 for the other, and with known payoffs. The behavioral economists who do this kind of research have come up with some pretty interesting cases of the market, what looks like clear market irrationalities that nonetheless are hard to make a buck off of but are still pretty clearly irrational. But it's not remotely this irrational. See, as bad as the situation is with investment, where people actually get paid to do it, the situation in philanthropy, where people don't collect their monetary payoffs at the end, is unbelievably worse. If the financial industry is madness, this is Sparta. So why exactly does this happen? So in order of plausibility, or in order of how much these hypotheses are currently believed to be true, valuation by prototype, it seems to be the best explanation. You say, how much will you pay to save N birds from dying in oil-covered ponds? And they visualize one bird, wings trapped, struggling to escape. And this creates some level of emotional arousal. And then because the numbers aren't being compared to any other numbers, the numbers don't seem particularly good or bad, so the numbers get thrown out the window. And the usual result is that as you go up by orders of magnitude, you get small linear increases in willingness to pay, if you get any increase at all. Another hypothesis is purchase of moral satisfaction, which says, okay, you ask someone this question, and they name an amount that is high enough to make them feel good about themselves and about how much they're sacrificing, which is a function of the person and their financial situation and how low or high of a standard they set for themselves when it comes to this sort of thing, but has nothing to do with the number of birds, and so is not sensitive to the number of birds. Oh, and the third hypothesis is good cause dump, which is that people have some amount they're willing to pay for any cause that has to do with the environment, and you ask any question about the environment and they give you the same amount of money. And similar research along these lines shows that the people would pay only 57% more to protect all 47 federally protected wetlands in Oregon than one federally protected wetland in Oregon. And yeah, Sparta. Oh, and no matter how I'm only touching on the very tip of the surface of these issues over here. You study them long, there's hundreds of experiments like these, and they keep on getting worse and worse and worse. You think, just when you think you've finally hit rock bottom, you're as pessimistic as it gets, and it can't possibly get any worse, it gets worse. And we're not even going to get close to that over here, but just so you know. For example, you hear about scope neglect, you go, okay, this is Sparta. And then it gets worse. So this was a test where they told people that they needed around $300,000 to save, in condition one was the money is required to save one child. Then the average donation was 10.71 shekels, and in the condition where you're told that the same amount of money will save 8 children, the donation is 5 shekels, because one child is, a specific focus of attention. 8 children, vague, your attention wanders, you don't really know, and maybe you're even remembering that there are lots of other children out there. Madness, Sparta, H.P. Lovecraft. Availability. Which is a more frequent cause of death, homicide or stomach cancer? Take a moment to guess. Well, for a particular region, I forget what the actual region was, subjects estimated 5,600 deaths from homicide and 3,300 deaths from stomach cancer. The actual numbers are 18,900 deaths from homicide and 95,100 deaths from stomach cancer. Now, why would someone make that sort of mistake? Light was shed on this by a very clever further part of the experiment in which they counted the number of cases reported in the newspaper. 208 cases of homicide were reported and only 1 case of stomach cancer. Now, there's an interesting ambiguity as to what the chain of causality was over there and whether people overestimated the number of homicides because it was more reported in the newspaper, or whether homicide is just more available in memory because it's more vivid, and so the people remembered it more and the newspaper reported it more. But the point is, the easier something is to remember, the more probable it seems, which in some cases may be a good way of estimating, but that heuristic introduces systematic biases. For example, earthquake insurance, people buy more earthquake insurance immediately after a quake, and then the purchases drop off as memories fade, which of course is perfectly rational because earthquakes release tectonic tension, and then the tectonic tension slowly builds up again. People on floodplains seem to be very much prisoners of experience. The size of the floods they've gotten recently set an upward bound on the size of the floods to which they appear to think they should be concerned with the startling result, or at least this was result as of 1978, that when you build dams, the floods go down in frequency, so you feel secure, so you take fewer precautions, and the number of floods goes down. But because you've taken so many fewer precautions, the damage per flood is so much greater that the average yearly damage goes up. This brings me to the giant risks part. Existential risks are those that annihilate Earth-originating intelligent life or permanently and drastically curtail its potential. If your car is stolen, that risk is personal in scope, it's just you, and it's endurable in intensity. You can recover from having your car stolen. Genocide is local in scope, it's a country, and it's terminal intensity. You can't really undo the genocide or do something to make up for it. And in the little X marks the spot are the global risks that are of terminal intensity. Here's just a few of them in sort of rough order of priority, as set down by Nick Bostrom and sort of slightly edited by myself. There's deliberate use of nanotechnology, nuclear holocaust, not just set us back 100 years, but drive our numbers down to the point where we go extinct. Poorly programmed superintelligence, that's what the Singularity Institute does, that's what I do. That is, we try to not poorly program superintelligence. And I've been giving you some reasons why people are going to tend to be crazy about these risks. Because they're not available. Oddly enough, we don't remember going extinct. Scope neglect. Well, if the prospect of one individual dying of a genetically engineered disease creates some level of emotional arousal in you, and then the fact that the entire human species and its entire future all got wiped out may tend to get thrown out the window. Conjunction fallacy. You might focus on very specific scenarios, adding more details. And the try to remember what I covered so far. Well, anyway, I'll just go into haven't had a whole lot of sleep lately. So And here's another bias that I think is particularly going to be prevalent in this particular problem. Would you rather have an epileptic seizure in front of 1 bystander or 5 bystanders? Students, 85% of students apparently having an epileptic seizure in front of 1 bystander were helped. Only 31% were helped by 5 bystanders. That is, if there are 5, only in 31% of cases does anyone help. Is this because people are selfish and want to let someone else do it? Well, that's probably got something to do with it, but if smoke is entering from under a door, if there's 1 subject, they leave the room and tell someone about the smoke 75% of the time. 3 subjects, only 38% of the time was the smoke reported at all. And if there's 1 subject and 2 Confederates who deliberately ignore the smoke, then only 10% report it, which is significantly lower than you would expect from these numbers. Diffusion of responsibility is one problem. The sense that, well, it's not me who has to act, lowers the lowers the arousal to the point where no action gets done. But the even larger problem is pluralistic ignorance. Someone's having an epileptic seizure. Is this a real problem? You don't know. So you sort of dart your eyes over at the person next to you while remaining calm yourself to see if the other person's reacting to it as an emergency. But meanwhile, you try to look calm yourself so you don't lose status by, seeming to panic over something that could just be nothing. Meanwhile, the other person is trying to look calm while darting his eyes over at you. And that's pluralistic ignorance. It's a special case of conformity. Would you say that X is the same size as A, B, or C? Now, you might think that's an easy problem, but suppose your Confederates say, one after the other, or pardon me, the experimenter plants some Confederates next to you. Everyone in the room is a Confederate of the experimenter except you. And all the other ones say, one after another, X is equal to C. You're asked second to last, not last, makes them a little less suspicious. 3/4 of subjects conformed at least once. 1/3 of subjects conformed more than half the time. Some of them said they had actually believed some of their own answers. And another important addendum to this result is that if there's one person who gives a different answer, even if the different answer is also wrong, the number of people who conform drop to around 5 to 10% in different experiments. This has been replicated a lot of times, by the way. And if you ask the people afterwards whether that other single dissenter made any difference to their decision to give the correct answer, they say no. And that can be true of some of them, but not all of them. They say they felt a great sense of kinship with that other dissenter, but they don't think that it actually affected their own decision to dissent. This is one reason why it's important to tolerate dissent. It sets an example. It's also a good reason why, if you actually want to get things done, you'd probably, and you're the boss, you'd probably be better off asking everyone to write down their opinion on separate pieces of paper and hand it in at the start of the problem, rather than telling them what your opinion is and asking for what they think of it. I sometimes say of this that it's the difference between joining the rebellion and leaving the pack. Real dissent doesn't feel like going to school wearing black. Real dissent feels like going to school wearing a clown suit. And you can see why, because, if you joined a rebellion back in the ancestral environment, well, your new tribe might thrive and you might gain high status. And if you're the only one in your tribe who believes something, they'll kick you out. You'll probably die. So, clown suit, a lot more difficult than black. And because of this conformity, because of the problem of pluralistic ignorance, it is possible for the world to be crazy. The finance industry is one example of a crazy part of the world. Philanthropy is much more crazy. So one sort of heuristic I might suggest using is Aubrey de Grey tells you aging is bad. Don't ask yourself, should I think that aging is bad? Ask yourself, if everyone else in the world, or at least everyone else at my company, thought that aging was bad, would I be the first one to stand up and say that aging is good? The really large, important risks, They're subject to conjunction fallacy, where we worry about overly detailed and narrow scenarios for the world going wrong. They're subject to scope and sensitivity, where we neglect completely the number of lives at risk. It's subject to the availability bias. No one remembers an extinction event. It's subject to the imaginability heuristic and the associated bias, which I took out of this presentation and forgot to delete from this slide. It's subject to conformity and the bystander effect. It's a global risk, so nobody feels personally responsible for it, so no one acts at all. And oh yes, I should mention about the bystander effect. A lot of these risks we don't know how to do anything about. That is, even if we tell people about them, they're still subject to the same bias. With the bystander effect, though, people who know about the bystander effect actually are a lot more likely to act in emergencies. So next time you see someone having an epileptic fit, if you don't help them, you're the only one in that crowd who knows about the bystander effect. And Robert Cialdini recommends that if you are having a heart attack, you don't say, "Help me," you point to a particular person and say, "You in the red shirt, help me." Now, if I were really nasty, I would just point to some poor schmuck in the audience right now and say, "You, save the world. Donate to the Singularity Institute." But that would be bad. And, you study more and more of these things. It goes on apparently forever. They're still generating more and more of them. The world is mad. It's an experimentally demonstrated fact. The data admit of no other interpretation. And the fact that humanity is spending billions of dollars annually on football, while ignoring the existential risk that can completely extinguish it, and whose successful navigation could determine the shape of its whole future, there's no sort of deeply clever explanation for that. We're just crazy. Any questions?
Over here. Actually, I've seen a number of global extinction events, many comets smashing into the Earth causing worldwide destruction. So we have seen these things, but Hollywood has been the medium. How do these kinds of movies affect these studies?
Well, every time I try to talk about upside and downside of AI, someone asks me about the Terminator scenario, just like it's available. Well, they don't think it happened here, but, sort of same psychology as if it had happened on some other planet and they got to see it happen, and so it might well happen here as well. It drives me up the wall. Hollywood itself is subject to a number of biases, like the good story bias, as Nick Bostrom puts it. Namely, if you have really powerful AIs and humans go squish, that's not a good story. So Hollywood doesn't tell that story. They tell stories about, AIs that are, slightly more powerful than humans at the start of the story, but, not just, slightly more powerful enough that the humans, by pluck and the indomitable human spirit, can overcome the marching robot armies with glowing red eyes. And this is probably not the best forecast that you could use.
Has there ever been a concerted or organized effort to harness this cognitive madness for something good instead of football? As you've shown, it's pretty easy to trick people. Has anyone set aside their personal ethics and tried to engineer something, or is it kind of doomed to failure?
That's not really what the Singularity Institute does, but the Obama administration, I understand, actually does have some psychologists along these lines advising them on how, for example, to set up plans that are opt-out instead of opt-in, so that they can get more people in pension or health insurance, something or other. So yes, the Obama administration is being advised by people who know about this stuff. Good or bad, you decide.
I was wondering if you could comment on any cognitive biases that might be present in language itself. There's been some suggestion, I don't know if you've heard of E-prime, which seeks to eliminate like reference to the first person, because that might, the very act of linguistics and how we conceptualize what we talk about might introduce bias by word choice. And if any comments on that?
This one thinks that there has that there has never been and may well never be a language in which it is the least bit difficult to think stupid thoughts. And I'm not sure that the existing languages in this area, I mean, the people who learn them have not taken over the finance industry. So I'm not sure yet that there's a sort of large increment of performance that's been demonstrated. But I mean, if someone did devise a synthetic language and the people who are using it, started scoring better on these kinds of problems and so on, then I would reconsider my... One more question.
Well, I'll ask the dissenting question then. With a lot of data provided about exponential curves and precise timelines within like 20 or 30 years, many other data points like that, there's some serious challenges still in front to actually build an AGI. Is it possible that there's this bias and all of these details are unfairly creating this perception that this is a reasonable period of time that this could happen?
Yes. And to further amplify on that, when you're ignorant, the thing to do is widen your confidence bounds. So indeed, we do have these very specific scenarios. We have Moore's Law. Moravec in the 1980s did this extrapolation of Moore's Law that actually undershot the real line of progress. He spent a lot of his book justifying the preposterous belief that Moore's Law could continue until 2010, and we got the computers he wanted in like 2006 or something like that. But the part where he said, well, this is how many operations per second the brain uses, and so this is when we'll have AI, that part didn't quite work, and it only has to go wrong in one place for the whole line of argument to fail. So even if I knew exactly how to build AI, and I knew exactly what resources I had available and what people I would be using to do it, I still couldn't predict the exact arrival time because of general project management chaos. But on the other hand, you don't want to make the sort of converse mistake of thinking, I don't know how to do AI, therefore the problem is very hard, therefore it will take a very long time. In fact, I'll say 500 years because 500 years feels like as hard as this problem feels to me. Ignorance exists in the mind, not in reality. A blank map does not correspond to a blank territory. If we're ignorant, that's a fact about our state of mind, not a fact about the phenomenon itself. Intelligence is not inherently mysterious. We're confused about it. And the thing about confusion is that it can go away in an arbitrarily short and arbitrarily long time. If we don't know, that means we widen our confidence bounds in both directions. And that would be my reply.
You can go take your